Let's take a look at some other psychological tools and traps that might arise in a negotiation like the house on Elm Street. First, the principle of availability, which means that we make decisions on the basis of information that is easy to retrieve. It's hard to determine from these facts where availability might apply, but just for example, when Tracy and Pat are thinking about the values of the house, I think it's easy for them to rely on some information that's very easy to retrieve, such as the tax assessment on the house and the value of the most recent sale in the neighborhood. And by doing that, perhaps they overlook some other information, such as the appreciation in real estate values. The facts state in both roles that there has been substantial appreciation in real estate over the past few years. So whether this is availability or anchoring, there are other explanations, but I imagine there's a tendency for you and I to rely on the numbers that are easily available, the tax assessment and the prior sales price. Escalation is another psychological tool or trap. And our basic takeaway from our discussion from escalation was that as negotiators, we should try to look at negotiations from the perspective of the other side. This is what separates good negotiators from great negotiators. And so, for example, if you are Pat, try to look at the real estate sale from the perspective of the uncle. If you have asked the right questions earlier, you know that the uncle is old, in poor health. You know that the house has not been well maintained. And so looking at it from his perspective, you realize that probably he wants a sale as soon as possible. Another principle is reciprocation, or also known as reciprocity, which means that if you give something to the other side, they feel a need to repay you. Now, reciprocity in a negotiation like this often arises when there are multiple issues, and some of these issues mean more to one side than to the other, which gives you a chance to give something to the other side and perhaps get something in return. So, for example, in this negotiation, the uncle wants a piece of tile from the kitchen. Unknown to the uncle, giving the tile means nothing to Pat because the house is going to be knocked down in any event. As far as Pat is concerned, the uncle can have the entire kitchen if he wants to. But of course, Pat is not going to mention that. And so what Pat could do is to mull over the request, make it sound as though it's a difficult request, and then maybe offer the uncle not only the tile, but something else from the kitchen. Maybe there are other tiles in the kitchen. And so Pat could say to the uncle, look, it appears that this tile means a lot to you. What if I gave you the whole set of tiles? So Pat would be giving something to the uncle, and then the uncle, with given human nature, might feel the need to reciprocate, to give something back to Pat. So when it comes time to negotiate something that's important to Pat, such as the date of transfer of possession, the uncle might be more willing to budge. So that's how reciprocity plays out in a multiple issue negotiation like this. We have the contrast principle, where items look quite different when presented in sequence, and that principle probably is not relevant in this particular negotiation. The final psychological tool or trap is the big picture perspective, which is basically saying don't get lost in the details. This is another very important perspective, and I want to save that along with the fixed pi assumption for our concluding look at this negotiation. So I'm going to put that on the shelf for a few minutes. So those are the 9 psychological tools and traps and how they apply to this negotiation.